Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Of course, we've seen a lot of weapons come in and out of the meta over the course of the past few seasons. Over the course of Modern Warfare, things switched up quite a bit. Here in Cold War, they're switching up even more just because Raven is really just going ham with all the weapon tuning. It seems like every time we have a major update coming up, we've got new weapon changes and new attachment changes coming in. But ultimately, it's like I click recording and the planes just they don't stop coming. It's like Smash Mouth is just flying overhead constantly. But when it comes down to it, the weapons you want to be using are those weapons that have really good TTKs in quite a few situations. And today we are breaking down the top 5 weapons with the best TTKs here in Warzone right now. If you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. Would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new here or if you haven't already subscribed, I am always covering everything going on in COD, news, updates, loadouts, tips. It's all right here. So feel free to subscribe. That way you can always stay up to date. Also, today is the final day of the huge 30% off discount that Gamer Advantage is doing for all the elite bundles. Code Immortal stacks on top of the July sale going on. So if you want to grab a bundle or really anything else on the site, Code Immortal has got you covered there. So we're going to go through these weapons and sort of build the ideal loadouts for them as we go through each of them. The first weapon we're looking at here is the Modern Warfare PKM. Honestly, what I would consider to be sort of a sleeper weapon in the current meta. This is probably the best LMG right now outside of the MG82. There are some other very competitive ones. The Stoner is very good. The Bruin is very good, but the PKM really, ever since Warzone launched, has been a very, very dominant weapon, and its TTK is extremely competitive, especially over range. Obviously, it's an LMG. You're not using it up close and as a fast weapon, but over range, this thing is nuts. It has in between a 600 and an 800 millisecond TTK, which in the grand scheme of things is pretty fast. Obviously, you hear 600 and 800. That doesn't seem like it'd be all that fast, but, you know, in game, in an actual fight, that's very competitive. So the PKM is a powerhouse of a weapon. It is a bit slower though, so you really got to take that into account. You got to make sure you have a secondary that can sort of play off of that and, you know, really play with that well, because if you're just going to be bogged down constantly, it's not going to be the best situation. But when it comes to the ideal loadout here, of course, this is a Modern Warfare weapon, so it's very straightforward because everything does what it says it does. First up, we got to have the monolithic suppressor. That's a no-brainer. You always are using that on pretty much every gun in the game that's from Modern Warfare. As far as the barrel goes, again, with Modern Warfare, it's super easy. You pretty much are always going for the longest barrel. In this case, it's the 26.9. Nice extended barrel. It's going to give us that range and the velocity increase as well as some added control. You'll love to see it. Now, something that the PKM has that is actually really unique is the snatch grip. Of course, most underbarrels are good for either all mobility or, in the case of a lot of Modern Warfare underbarrels, better recoil control. That's what things like the operator grip will do, the Merc 4 grip, the Commando 4 grip most of the time. But the snatch grip actually gives you better control and it increases your aim down sight speed, which in the case of an LMG is always super nice to have just because it is a lot slower than most other weapons. Of course, it's an LMG. You don't really need an ammo attachment here. I like to go for an optic, and of course, in Modern Warfare, the VOK 3x is always ideal. You go ahead, you throw in that T-pose reticle on there. That's feeling super clean. Really, really easy to track targets with that. Then for the last attachment, you can sort of mess around. I would usually probably go for a tack laser, get some stability in there and get some better mobility as well. You could also go for something like a no stock if you wanted to have it a bit more agile. Even something like the close quarter stock could work well. You could go for sleight of hand if you wanted to because the reload is pretty slow. Or you can go for something like the Stippy Grippy, the Icon, and get some better mobility there. But overall, this setup I actually am really comfortable with and I like this one quite a bit. Now, next up, we're staying on the trend of long-range TTKs, and actually, we're staying with the LMGs, one that I just mentioned, the Stoner 63 from Cold War. This thing actually has in between a 575-ish and 800 millisecond TTK over range. This one is actually a bit better than the PKM in some of those closer range fights, you know, sub 40 meters. Then over range, it's a lot more competitive with the PKM. They're more neck and neck there. But again, when it comes to ranged fights, it's actually a very, very competitive TTK when you compare it with things like the Grau, the Kilo, even things like the Farah or the Krig right now. It's going to be able to really stand up to those weapons because the TTK here is so good. And honestly, these LMGs, the PKM and the Stoner, they're super easy to use. The recoil is very minimal. The velocity is great. Like the damage per mag here is actually pretty ridiculous. We're going to build this one pretty similar to the PKM basically. Of course, first and foremost, we got to go for the suppressor. Same deal as with the monolithic. That one's going to help out a ton. Of course, with the LMGs, really you're only looking at 2 options here for the most ideal setup in my opinion. It's match grade versus task force. Match grade is going to give you good pros. You get better velocity and better range, then also better control. And you're going to get those same pros out of task force. However, with task force, you're getting more control and more velocity and more range, but you're also getting more decreases as well. You're getting, you know, less hip fire accuracy, less ADS speed, less sprinting speed, whereas with match grade, you're getting those decreases, but they're not as big. So everything is like in smaller scales here. Match grade is 1 increase to everything. Task force is 2 increase to everything. That's, I would say, a good way to look at it. And for that reason, I feel like match grade is totally sufficient. You could go for task force, but you're going to be a lot slower here. Match grade, I feel like, is totally viable for a very competitive and well-rounded LMG setup. Again, we're going to need an optic here. 3 times is what I like to go for. It's very similar to the T-pose on the VLK 3 times for Modern Warfare, so I sort of mimic that there. I also go for an underbarrel here. Field agent's going to be the go-to. Better recoil control all across the board. And again, for the last attachment, you can sort of mess around. Fast mag, I know, is a pretty popular choice just because this reload is pretty slow. You could go for that. If you wanted to, you could go for something like Tiger Team, maybe get some better mobility out of that. You don't really have a need to use any of these other lasers though, like 5 milliwatt really wouldn't make sense here. The Raider Pad stock, that's going to be a great choice, or you could go for something like the Airborne Elastic Wrap, get yourself a better ADS time. You can sort of, like I said, mess around with this final attachment, but this is a setup that I'd probably recommend. This is what I would most likely use on the Stoner. Then next up, we have a super simple one. We can't even go over any attachments here. It's the nail gun. And of course, this thing is sort of in the process of being nerfed. Raven did just decrease the whole damage range on it, but it's a nail gun. You're only using this in close quarters engagements. This is basically a counter to shotguns. You have zero reason to use this past like 20 meters right now. It's pretty much useless there, but up close, this thing has under a 400 millisecond TTK, which is absolutely insane. That is one of the highest TTKs we've ever seen in Warzone. And when I say highest, I mean lowest in theory. It kills fast. The wording here is always super weird and super awkward because you have to know exactly what I'm implying to fully get it. But the TTK is insane on the nail gun. Safe to say that's the easiest way to put it. But of course, we can't build any attachments here. It doesn't have any attachments available. You're stuck with the base 20 round mag. And for that reason, I don't think a ton of people will be using this weapon because you can't get a suppressor on it. You can't get more than 20 rounds on it. Like, it's not super viable in things outside of Rebirth or solos or duos just because you don't have the ammo capacity. But when we're strictly talking about what TTKs are really, really good and very competitive, the nail gun is arguably one of the best in the game, despite being such a niche weapon because it is so limited in other areas. But overall, this thing is a beast when it comes to time to kill. Then, of course, we can't talk about the best TTKs in Warzone without mentioning the ASVAL. Another very niche weapon because it is quite limited. It's pretty slow. It doesn't really have a ton of ammo, just like the nail gun, so it's pretty limited in what you can use it in terms of situations. 1-on-3, 1-on-4 is going to be very hard with this thing, but its TTK under 500 milliseconds through about 30 meters is extremely competitive. Most other guns can't even come close to that, especially when you also factor in the range that the Val has. It doesn't really have any major drop-offs, so it's TTK through and through. Close range, medium, long range, it's very competitive, to say the least. So first up, we got to go for the OSA barrel. It's going to give us that better range and that better velocity. That's huge. I like to go for the tac laser because, as you see with the OSA barrel, we are losing aim down sight speed, and this thing is already pretty slow as is. So gaining that back some, but then also getting some better stability is actually pretty crucial in my opinion. I don't go for an optic here. I don't feel it's super necessary. You're not really using this at extreme ranges. For a stock, I go for the Strelock. It's going to give you better control and better stability. Again, unfortunately, it does hurt your mobility some, but overall, I feel like it's probably the best route to go here with what we have. You could probably swap that out for something like sleight of hand, but again, it sort of comes down to how you want to use it the most. You definitely need an underbarrel on this thing. The recoil is not the most ideal. Commando, I see people using a lot. I see some people go for Merc because that's going to help out the hip fire accuracy. You could even go for something like Ranger, which is going to be, again, a bit slower, so you have not the most ideal aggressive setup for it in that case. I'd probably opt for, honestly, Commando, just because it's what I'm the most comfortable with, and it's not going to deal a ton of decreases to the overall weapon. You could even go for the Operator again, but I feel like really any choice here is going to have some drawback here. Commando versus the other grips won't control it as much, but it'll at least give you something. And if you can learn that recoil pattern, you're going to be sitting pretty. Then finally, you have to go for the 30-round mags. Unfortunately, that's the largest option here. I wish you could get more. This weapon would be insane if you could, but we're pretty much playing with the cards we got dealt here. 30-round mags is a must-have because you need that extra ammo. And with all that combined, this TTK is extremely competitive, and this thing will fry absolutely everyone. And then the final weapon we're looking at is the PPSH. This thing actually has very minimal damage drop-offs for an SMG. It's pretty similar to the Milano in that sense, but in close range fights, this thing's TTK is, I believe, just under 600 milliseconds, which is very competitive and really good competitively speaking, comparing it to other SMGs. So this thing up close is going to absolutely fry. Of course, when you compare that to something like the nail gun, it makes the nail gun look even more broken, right? But in terms of overall SMGs, and you look at them all, the PPSH is going to be one that's going to absolutely destroy up close. This thing and the Cold War MP5 are pretty much the best go-tos in those like sub 15 meter fights. Those will absolutely fry. Here for starters, you could go for the sound suppressor or the grease suppressor. The grease suppressor is going to be better if you're trying to use this as more of like a sniper support option and you want to use it in some more medium range fights. But honestly, I feel like sound suppressor works just fine, and you get some added mobility out of that, which I'm always a very big fan of. You got to go for the task force barrel, which this is like the go-to on all Cold War setups. And of course, you probably know where we're going with this entire setup because it is so basic. Tiger Team Spotlight is going to be our next choice here. We get some better mobility out of that. Of course, it's a sub. You want to be able to move fast. We also have the 71 round drum. This thing is perfect for all modes. You can finish with it, you can squad wipe with it, and it doesn't really slow you down all that much. Like, you get a slower reload and a slight drawback on ADS time, but really, as far as the 71 round drum goes, the mobility here is very, very good, all things considered. And then finally, we go for the Raider stock, better mobility yet again. This setup in general, I love. A lot of people do like to opt for a foregrip, though. They'll go for the Spetsnaz grip. If you want that, I'd probably drop the Tiger Team. You're still going to have good mobility, but you won't be flying like you would if you have the Tiger Team on that instead. But I'm comfortable with this, and I really, really like this setup too. So yeah, those are 5 of the best weapons when it comes to what their TTKs are compared to a lot of the other weapons in the game. These weapons will delete players left, right, and center. They're super fun to use. Would highly recommend trying out all these setups. Maybe with the exception of the nail gun because it doesn't actually have a physical setup. But hey, you want to go for the nail gun? By all means, I encourage it. It's a super fun weapon to use. Anyways, that is going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know by dropping a like on it. Would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't already subscribed, I am always covering everything going on in COD. So feel free to subscribe. That way you can always stay up to date. Once again, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. And I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.